He kissed my forehead, said he'd be right back, and disappeared with every dollar I had. They say betrayal hits hardest from those you trust most. I didn't expect roses and fireworks, I'm not naive. But I didn't expect to wake up alone in a town I'd moved to for him, in a shared apartment I'd paid for, with a joint bank account that suddenly showed zero. His name was Thomas Wilder. At least, that's what I knew him by. We met at a law conference in Denver. I was one of the panel speakers, nothing flashy, just a session on ethical litigation. He approached me during a coffee break, full of charm and sharp questions. He listened like I mattered. That should have been my first warning sign. We had lunch. Then dinner. He said he was an entrepreneur with a finance background, working on something big, confidential. He never pressured me, never asked for anything. He made me feel safe. Seen. It had been a long time since I'd felt either. Within 6 months, I'd moved from Austin to Seattle. Sold my car, gave up my private practice, and signed a lease under both our names. He talked about launching a consulting startup, said my legal background would be invaluable. We registered the LLC together. Opened an account. Pooled resources. We were a team. Or so I thought. The night before he vanished, he cooked. I remember that because it was rare. He lit candles, also rare, and told me I should start looking at office spaces. Said it was time we made it official, that we'd go sign the leasing documents first thing in the morning. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He left early to grab coffee. Said he wanted to surprise me. That was the last time I saw him. At first, I didn't panic. I called, then texted. Then again. And again. No response. I waited. I walked to the cafe 2 blocks down, thinking maybe he got caught up. The barista shook her head, she hadn't seen him that day. By noon, the calls started going straight to voicemail. By 3 p.m., the joint account was empty. By 5, I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a breakdown in communication. It was a clean break. But not clean for me. The rent was due. The LLC was tied to my name. The credit card debt we'd used to float the business, mine. I sat on the kitchen floor, staring at the transaction history. Plane ticket. Luxury hotel. Wire transfers I hadn't authorized. I filed a police report. They were polite, unsurprised. It happens, the officer said with a shrug. Romance scams. Financial manipulation. Civil court at best. I wasn't special. But I was angry. Anger has a taste, sharp, metallic, impossible to swallow. I didn't sleep that night. I opened my laptop and started digging. I checked property records, searched email headers, cross-referenced bank activity. The more I looked, the more I realized he hadn't just planned this. He'd rehearsed it. Different names. Same tactics. Other women. Other cities. Different stories, but the same exit strategy. I wasn't his first. But I was going to be his last. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not in rage, but in resolve. I wasn't going to crawl out of this quietly. I wasn't going to spend years rebuilding while he skipped to another life. If the justice system wouldn't touch him, I would find another way. I started with the smallest clue I had, a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, left on his phone 2 weeks before he vanished. I still had access to the cloud backup. The voice was female, irritated, short. You said L.A., not Portland. Don't lie to me, Tom. So he had someone else. Perfect. I traced the number to a burner, but the call had bounced through a VoIP app. Still, it was a start. I pulled the metadata, cross-referenced the time zone settings. Pacific. That narrowed it down. I checked business registry filings, nothing under Wilder. But under T.J. Wilkes, a consulting firm had been formed just 2 months prior. The contact listed was a name I didn't recognize, but the email domain matched one I'd seen him use. Sloppier than I expected. I started building a timeline. Every transaction. Every login. Every alias. I wasn't trying to destroy him, I was documenting him. Digitally. Legally. Strategically. If he'd made even one mistake, I'd find it. And he had. A booking confirmation in his email trash folder, half deleted but recoverable. A luxury condo in Portland, paid for in full under a false name, but the delivery instructions for the key fob included his voice message. I forwarded it to myself, saved it under the folder name, Wilder. Day 1. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was exposure. I wanted him to see the walls closing in. I wanted him to feel what I felt that morning, powerless, stunned, unraveling in real time. So I packed my bag, 1 notebook, 1 burner phone, 2 sets of clothes, and I drove. Seattle to Portland is 3 hours if traffic's light. I made it in 2.5. The condo was real. The concierge was indifferent. I used the spare key I'd found listed in the rental agreement. The lock clicked open like it was waiting for me. He wasn't there. But his laptop was. And that was enough. I closed the door behind me, pulled on gloves, and opened the lid. Password protected. But not encrypted. Challenge accepted. The first thing I noticed was that the password hint was blank. That told me everything. He thought no one would ever get this far. But I'd known him, at least the version he wanted me to know. I knew how he thought. He liked patterns, symmetry. He reused passcodes when he thought no one was looking. I tried the date we registered the LLC. No luck. Then his sister's birthday, at least, the one he'd told me about. Nothing. Then I remembered something he'd said the night we first kissed, in one of those too honest moments people have when they think they're safe. Every password I use has 3 parts. A lie, a truth, and a number I can't forget. I typed in Denver 1991 skyline. The screen blinked. Then opened. The desktop was clean too clean. But that's never the real place to look. I checked the trash folder. Over 200 files. Invoices. Contracts. Voice memos. One folder stood out, Consulting Assets, Archive. Inside, 20 subfolders. Each named after a woman. First names only. Some I recognized from the records I'd pulled. Others were new. There was one with my name. I clicked it. Inside were PDFs of my resume, screenshots of our texts, scans of my driver's license, a photo of us from our weekend in Taos. Under that, a document titled Exit Plan, BL, PDF. I opened it. My stomach locked. It wasn't just a breakdown of how to leave. It was a timeline prepared weeks before he disappeared. It listed exact dates when he'd compliment me, when he'd talk about the future, when he'd casually mention starting a company. Every word he said had been calculated. At the bottom of the file was one line that made my hands go cold. Leave quietly. If she pushes back, discredit emotionally. Create distance with family narrative if necessary. Monitor bank access until relocation complete. I sat very still. Every flashback from the past 6 months reordered itself into a new language. One I hadn't spoken until now. There was another folder called Active Threads. I opened it. Emails. Dozens. Conversations with women, some flirtatious, some manipulative, all with intent. But one thread caught my eye. It was recent, time-stamped 3 days ago. He was planning another setup. New name. New woman. Same scheme. She was listed as Jessica, target. The emails read like a script. He'd already met her. Said she worked in marketing. They were discussing joint investments. She'd just wired him $9,000. My blood surged. I could stop it. I could warn her. I copied her email address, drafted a message from a secure account. Subject: This isn't about jealousy. It's about facts. Jessica. You don't know me, but I know him. And I know he's not who he says he is. If you've already sent money, check your accounts. If he's mentioned business, check the paperwork. I'm attaching proof. Use it however you need to, but please don't ignore it. I attached screenshots from the exit plan, the PDF with her name, and his aliases file. Then I hit send. Seconds later, my burner buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. No voicemail. Just silence. He knew. I logged out of everything, transferred the entire hard drive onto an encrypted USB, wiped my prints, and left the condo. By the time I hit the freeway, adrenaline had settled into a slow burn. I wasn't finished. This wasn't just about warning Jessica. It was about gathering enough to make it impossible for him to do this again. Back in my apartment, I backed up everything into a separate cloud folder and shared it with a lawyer friend in Dallas, one who'd seen enough fraud cases to know where this would land. He called me within the hour. "This is airtight," he said. "You've got identity theft, wire fraud, misrepresentation. But if you want it to stick, you need to show pattern. The others, can you find them?" I could. Over the next 48 hours, I did nothing but search. Social profiles, digital footprints, LinkedIn connections, archived forums. I found 6 more women. Some had already blocked him. Some had no idea. One, a woman named Dana from San Diego, had filed bankruptcy 2 months after he disappeared from her life. I created a secure chat group, shared my findings. At first, they were suspicious. One of them even accused me of being jealous. But then I showed them the documents. Their own names. The scripts. Silence. Then fury. It was Dana who said it first. "We take him down. Together." By the end of the week, we had a strategy. Legal angles. Public exposure. Multiple testimonies, aligned timelines, financial records to prove damages. And something else. A name. His real one. A birth certificate Dana had found, tied to a tax form she'd kept. His real name wasn't Thomas Wilder. It was Gregory James Hall. Born in Missouri. Arrested at 23 for fraud, charges dropped. It had taken him over a decade to perfect the game. We were going to end it in less than a month. The final move? Leverage his ego. Set a trap. And I was the bait. He called me the next night. I let it ring until the last second, then answered, my voice flat. "Phoebe," he said, like we were old friends, like he hadn't vanished with everything I owned. "You've been busy." He was testing me, measuring how much I knew. I kept my tone steady. "Not as busy as you've been. How's Jessica?" A pause. A shift in breath. Then the mask slipped back on. "You're confused. There's a lot of misinformation going around. Maybe we should meet. Talk this out." I almost laughed. The man who disappeared with my savings, forged documents, and listed me as an emotional liability on his exit plan wanted to talk things out. But I said yes, because that was the plan. We agreed to meet in Tacoma, neutral ground, close enough to Portland, but far from his usual haunts. I picked a public cafe near a courthouse. Cameras. Witnesses. Safety. Dana's contact in law enforcement would be nearby, posing as a customer. He wouldn't know it, but the walls would already be closing in. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear, adrenaline. Every instinct I had screamed caution. Men like him don't go down quietly. They manipulate until the final second. But I wasn't going in blind. He arrived 5 minutes late. Of course. Enough to reassert control. He sat down, eyes scanning the room. I didn't offer a handshake. "I've missed you," he said, like the last year hadn't happened. "I brought something," I replied, sliding a small folder across the table. Inside were 2 documents, copies of the emails he'd sent Dana and the recorded phone call to Jessica, time-stamped and transcribed. He didn't open it. He smiled, leaned back, and said, "You think you're clever." I looked him dead in the eyes. "No. I know I am." He shifted. Just slightly. It was enough. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to return what you took from me fully. Then from Jessica. Then Dana. Then everyone else. Or this folder becomes public. We've got 5 statements, 4 timelines, a subpoena request for the hard drive you left behind, and your real name." Still, he smirked. "And if I don't?" I leaned forward. "Then I don't take this to court. I take it to every woman you'll ever meet." That landed. He blinked, for the first time uncertain. "I've already filed intent to sue. Multiple parties. Civil damages, criminal fraud if it sticks. But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for record. That's what matters now. Legacy. You can't outrun digital truth." He scoffed. "What do you want, Phoebe? An apology?" "No," I said. "A future." Behind me, Dana's contact gave the signal. The tap on his coffee cup. Subtle. Precise. That's when the 2 plainclothes officers stepped inside. He saw them too late. "Gregory James Hall," one of them said calmly. "We have a warrant." His expression didn't break. Not at first. But when they showed him the affidavit signed, sealed, with 7 women's testimonies, his hand twitched. He stood, hands raised slightly, but the calm was gone. The predator had been unmasked, and the man underneath looked far smaller than I remembered. As they escorted him out, he looked back once. I didn't return it. The cafe buzzed around me, unaware of the shift that had just happened. I sat for another 10 minutes, watching the street, breathing slow. The air didn't feel cleaner, but it felt earned. Later that afternoon, the detective called me directly. Booked. No resistance. His record's a mess. Your documentation helped connect 2 open fraud cases in California and Nevada. You did more than file a report. You exposed a network. I thanked him, hung up, and sat with the silence. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like completion. 3 days later, the news picked it up. Not headline material, but enough. Man accused of serial financial abuse arrested after coordinated effort by victims. They didn't use my name. I didn't want them to. Jessica messaged me. 1 line. You saved me before it got worse. I won't forget that. Dana sent a longer one. He won't get to do it again. And you made sure of that. That night, I deleted the burner account. Closed the backup folder. But before I did, I printed 1 page, the timeline he wrote for me. His exit plan. I pinned it inside a file marked, "Correction, not your ending." Justice doesn't arrive like thunder. It settles in slowly, unnoticed by most. No applause, no headlines screaming victory. Just quiet, deliberate consequence. 3 weeks after Gregory's arrest, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. They were filing formal charges, 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 of identity theft, 1 count of criminal impersonation. More might follow. I didn't feel joy, just clarity. I didn't attend the bail hearing. Dana went. She said he looked different, tired, angry, but still trying to charm the room. It didn't work. Bail was denied. The judge called him a consistent, calculated danger to vulnerable individuals. He would face trial. That night, I took a walk. Not to think. Not to escape. Just to feel my feet move beneath me, my pace, my direction. No one else's. The group chat we created with the other women remained active, but less frantic now. The energy had shifted. We weren't victims comparing notes anymore. We were co-authors, writing an ending no one expected us to reach. Jessica had started therapy. Dana was rebuilding her credit. Another woman, Serena, was preparing a civil suit. As for me, I'd gone back to work. Not in private practice. That part of my life felt closed, at least for now. I joined a nonprofit that offered legal support to women in financial abuse situations. No glossy campaigns. No press releases. Just impact. I thought about how much of my life had been shaped by silence. Not absence of sound, absence of being heard. Gregory hadn't just taken my money. He'd tried to take my narrative, twist it, erase it, replace it with a version that suited him. And before him, there were others. Not con men. Just people who mistook my loyalty for weakness. No more. One morning, I received an email from a journalist. She was working on a feature about financial coercion and emotional manipulation in relationships. She'd heard about the arrest and wanted to include a survivor's voice. I said no at first. But then I remembered something my grandfather used to tell me when I was little. Truth isn't loud, but it's permanent. Speak it once, and it stays. So I said yes on my terms. No name. No photo. Just my words. The article went live 2 weeks later. It didn't go viral, but it reached the right people. I received a message from a woman in Ohio who said she read my words and left a man who had drained her savings while telling her she was overreacting. Another from a woman in Arizona who had just filed her own fraud report after months of gaslighting. That's what justice looks like sometimes, not a courtroom, not a sentence, but a ripple. And then, the letter arrived. Cream envelope. Handwritten address. I recognized the scrawl immediately. It was from Gregory. From jail. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the edge of the kitchen counter for 2 days. Eventually, curiosity won. Inside was 1 page. 3 sentences. You win. I didn't think you'd fight back. I underestimated you. No apology. No remorse. Just acknowledgement. I folded the letter in half and slid it into the file I'd kept since this all began. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. People like him don't regret the pain, they regret getting caught. A few days later, I visited the courthouse to deliver a final batch of documentation. As I stepped outside, I passed a woman who looked nervous, envelope clutched in her hands, face pinched with doubt. I didn't know her, but I knew that look. I smiled and said, "You're doing the right thing." She nodded slowly. "I hope so." "You are," I said. Sometimes truth takes longer to echo, but it does. I left before she could ask anything else. She didn't need my story. She was already writing her own. Months passed. Trial was set for fall. I didn't need to testify. The evidence was enough. Gregory's public defender entered a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence, 5 years, with restitution. The court ordered him to repay what he took, though we all knew the money was gone. What mattered was the record. Official. Unshakable. That night, I sat on my porch with a blank notebook in my lap. Not a legal pad, not a case file. Just paper and space. I wrote, "This is what survival looks like. It's not loud. It's not perfect. But it's yours again." I didn't write his name again. He no longer mattered in the center of the story. I did. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Dana. She'd just won her civil suit. Another woman joined our chat. Another one filed. One by one, the stories kept coming not for validation, but connection. Proof that pain isn't weakness. That standing up isn't just possible, it's contagious. And me? I kept going. Quietly. Steadily. Because revenge doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like freedom. They asked me if I felt healed. It was at a panel discussion hosted by the nonprofit I now worked with. The moderator, a kind woman with soft authority, smiled as she asked the question in front of a modest audience of social workers, lawyers, and survivors. I paused. Because healing doesn't look like a finish line. It doesn't come with applause or a diploma. It comes in fragments, some slow, some sudden. And sometimes it doesn't come at all. You just learn to live differently. So I told the truth. "I don't think healing is the right word," I said. "I think it's more about reclamation. You take back what was yours, piece by piece. Your voice. Your time. Your name. And one day, you realize you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that makes them comfortable." The room was quiet, but not empty. I saw heads nod. Hands tighten slightly on pens. That's how you know when something lands, not in noise, but in stillness. After the panel, a woman approached me in the hallway. She didn't introduce herself, just said, "I recognized myself in what you said." I've been scared to name what happened to me. I looked at her and said the one thing I wish someone had told me sooner. You're allowed to say the truth, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. She nodded, eyes damp but steady. That night, I walked home slower than usual. The air was sharp, early fall pushing against the tail end of summer. I didn't think about Gregory. Not directly. Not anymore. But I thought about what he tried to do, how he almost succeeded in shrinking me down to silence. He failed. Months earlier, I'd printed a single phrase and taped it to my mirror. I'd nearly forgotten it was there. That night, as I brushed my teeth, I looked up and saw it again. I'm not hard to love. I'm hard to use. I left it there. Weeks passed. Life moved on. The media cycle faded. The court process ended. The group chat quieted. Some women stayed in touch. Some didn't. That was okay. We'd done what we needed to do, for each other, and for ourselves. One day I got a message from Jessica, brief but full of weight. He used to say I was paranoid. Turns out, I was just perceptive. Thank you. I responded with a single line. Never let them convince you that clarity is a flaw. That became something of a mantra. Not a slogan, not a brand. Just a truth. We're taught that being unsure is safer than being assertive, that doubt is more polite than confidence. Especially if you're a woman. Especially if you've been hurt. But I learned something else. Doubt protects the liar. Clarity protects you. So I chose clarity. I chose it when I froze the joint account. I chose it when I answered that phone call with a flat voice. I chose it in the courtroom. I chose it in that cafe. And I chose it every time I got up and decided I was still mine. A few months later, I gave a workshop for women navigating financial abuse. One woman stayed after, quiet, waiting until the last chair emptied before she spoke. He said I was overthinking, she whispered. That I was imagining things. I nodded. That's what they do. They name your instincts delusion so they can name their manipulation logic. She took a breath, slow but deep. How do you stop doubting yourself? You don't, I said. You just stop making doubt your final answer. My life now is smaller in some ways, but deeper. I don't explain myself as much. I don't apologize for taking up emotional space. I don't entertain people who ask for access without accountability. The past doesn't disappear, but it no longer drags me. Sometimes I still see women who remind me of who I was back then, eager to believe, hopeful despite the cracks. I don't judge them. I understand them. Because I was her. And now I'm this. There's power in that. Not the kind that shouts. The kind that lasts. I visited my old apartment once, just to see. The building looked the same. The street hadn't changed. But I had. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I just stood across the street and let the memory run its course. Then I turned away. Not from pain, but toward what came next. The first real test wasn't in court. It came on a Tuesday morning when a man I barely knew asked if I wanted to get coffee. His name was Marcus. We'd met at a community roundtable on digital privacy and online fraud. He worked in cybersecurity, spoke softly, listened more than he talked. We'd exchanged a few work emails. Then, weeks later, out of nowhere, would you ever want to grab coffee? I stared at the message longer than I should have. Not because I was interested. Because I didn't know if I remembered how to say yes to something that didn't come with red flags or fire. I said yes anyway. We met at a place near my office. No pressure. No suggestion of anything more. And yet the entire time, my brain scanned for patterns, tells, loopholes. He mentioned his sister. Was she real? He paid in cash. Why? He knew where I worked. How? I caught myself halfway through the conversation. Not because I found anything suspicious, but because I wasn't really there. I wasn't listening to him. I was listening to echoes of someone else. Afterward, he walked me to my car and thanked me. That was it. No push. No follow-up. No test. It took me 2 days to answer his next message. That was nice. No pressure, just enjoyed the conversation. If you ever want to do it again, let me know. He didn't chase. He didn't corner me with charm. He left space. And that was more disarming than any lie I'd ever been told. Healing isn't a linear story. You don't cross a finish line and suddenly become whole again. Some days, you move forward. Other days, you flinch at kindness because it reminds you of manipulation in disguise. I talked to my therapist about it. She said something that stuck. Trust isn't something you give away again. It's something you learn to live alongside. Like a neighbor, not always welcome, but necessary. I started writing again. Not reports. Not legal strategy. Just thoughts. Fragments. What ifs. Moments I hadn't processed. One page was titled, The Cost of Almost. It listed things I almost lost. My savings. My name. My faith in my own memory. My silence. My power. Then I wrote underneath. Recovered, myself. It wasn't poetic. It was proof. Marcus and I eventually had dinner. Then another. I told him, early on, that I had history. Not in detail. Just enough to say, I might need time to trust what's safe. He didn't ask questions. Just said, take the time. That was new for me. And terrifying. People assume fear fades after justice. That when the villain is gone, the shadows go with them. But the truth is, sometimes the trauma stays after the threat ends. It hides in kind gestures, in quiet moments, in pauses that feel too familiar. And yet, I kept showing up. Not for him. For me. One day, I got an email from a woman in another state. She said she found my name mentioned in a survivors forum. She'd been targeted by someone similar. Same tactics. Different man. Reading what you did gave me the nerve to gather my own documents. I've already filed a police report. Thank you for going public, even anonymously. I stared at her message for a long time. It's easy to forget that when you drag truth into the light, others can find their way out of it too. I replied, "You're not weak for believing. You're strong for seeing through it. Keep going. It counts." I still keep the file. Not to revisit the pain, but because it reminds me of the fork in the road where I made a choice to chase answers instead of explanations, to build a case instead of staying broken. It's been a year now. Gregory is still in prison. There's been no appeal, no contact. He's a cautionary tale in someone else's timeline now, not mine. And me? I live quieter these days. I say no faster. I listen closer. I don't apologize for being careful. I don't shrink myself to make others more comfortable. I've stopped waiting for closure to feel safe. Safety, I've learned, is something you carry inside. Like instinct. Like armor. Sometimes, when I walk past mirrored windows or my own reflection, I pause. Not to admire. Not to inspect. Just to say, you stayed. You fought. You came back. And in the world I'm building now, that is more than enough. The surprising part wasn't how much I'd lost. It was how much I never really had to begin with. That realization came slowly. Not in a dramatic moment. Not in therapy. But one morning, standing in line at the DMV, a man ahead of me was arguing about paperwork. Loud, insistent, certain the system was wrong and he was right. I watched the clerk stay calm, quiet, methodical. No grand confrontation, no emotional unraveling. Just boundaries. That's what it looks like when someone doesn't give up their peace just to match someone else's chaos. I thought of all the times I'd done the opposite. For family. For coworkers. For him. I thought being understanding was strength. That love meant absorbing impact. It doesn't. Sometimes love is the choice to stop softening blows that were never yours to cushion. A month later, I gave a private talk at a local shelter. Small room. Low voices. Women in every phase of recovery. Some just out of the storm. Some still weathering it. One asked, "How do you know if it's happening to you? When it's not physical, when it's money, or guilt, or silence." I told her, if someone's version of love costs you your stability, your sense of reality, or your ability to say no, it's not love. It's control dressed as care. Another woman asked how I got over the shame. I said, by realizing it wasn't mine to carry. That line stuck with a few of them. One wrote it down. I watched her underline it 3 times. She didn't need the whole story. Just that one sentence to give her permission to let go. Marcus and I were still seeing each other. Slowly. Intentionally. No labels, no pressure. Just space to breathe. He never asked for more than I offered. Never punished me for pulling back when something felt too close. One night, we sat in his car after dinner, neither of us in a hurry to move. He looked at me and said, "You look like someone who double-checks exits." I didn't respond immediately. But eventually I said, "It's not about escape. It's about knowing I can leave if I need to. That choice is safety." He nodded once. "Then I'll never block the door." That mattered more than any declaration of love ever could. Later that week, I found the last letter Gregory had ever sent. It was tucked inside a file folder I hadn't touched in months. I almost threw it away without opening it. But something in me said, read it. Not to absorb. To confirm. It was short. Just 4 lines. They said I should show remorse. I don't know if I feel it. I think I'm just tired. You turned out stronger than I expected. Good for you. That was it. No apology. No responsibility. But also no more power. It didn't sting. It didn't sit. It just didn't matter. I burned the letter in a metal bowl behind my building. Quiet, simple. The paper curled, smoked, vanished. Not for revenge. Not for ritual. Just to make space. That night, I wrote one more entry in the notebook I'd started a year earlier. Closure isn't something you get. It's something you create. And it doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it just looks like not waiting anymore. I used to think I needed a full circle. That the end of one story had to loop neatly into the start of another. But life doesn't work like that. It frays. It splits. It knots in strange places. What matters is that you keep tying it back to truth. A few weeks later, I stood at a small legal clinic we'd opened for survivors. Not big, not polished, but real. The intake list was full. People were showing up. So were we. A young woman sat across from me, biting her lip, hands clenched tight. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. I recognized the beginning of her story. And maybe someday, she'd write her own ending. I handed her a form, looked her in the eyes, and said, "You're not alone. Not anymore." She didn't smile, but she nodded. That was enough. Now, I wake up most days without expecting disaster. I still check doors twice. I still keep backups of important files. That's not fear, it's preparation. It's awareness earned the hard way. But I also sleep. I laugh easier. I don't confuse kindness with currency. I don't negotiate my worth. And when it's quiet, really quiet, I don't feel the urge to fill it. I just let it be. The past isn't erased. It's just out of the driver's seat. That's what healing became for me. Not forgetting, but reclaiming who I was before they tried to rewrite me. And now, I move forward. Not to outrun what happened, but to prove it didn't get to finish the story. A year and a half after it all ended, I stopped calling it what happened to me. I started calling it what I walked through. It may sound small, but that shift changed everything. Because it gave me back the main character. It reminded me that survival wasn't passive. It wasn't something I endured. It was something I chose. Every time. Every day. The last time I saw his name was on a court filing update. Standard notice. Nothing personal. Just bureaucracy catching up to consequence. I closed the email without a second thought. Not out of anger. Out of disinterest. He wasn't a chapter anymore. He was just context. I moved again. Not to run from anything, just to start on my terms. A smaller city. Familiar streets. Fewer expectations. I chose a place close to the courthouse, not because I miss litigation, but because I liked walking past it. It reminded me of the day I brought proof instead of pain. When I showed up not to beg, but to testify. The nonprofit continued growing. We trained new volunteers. Launched a hotline. Set up workshops in high schools, early intervention matters. I watched teenagers listen, ask hard questions, take notes like they already knew what was at stake. I met a girl named Trinity. 17. Sharp, but quiet. After a session, she stayed behind. Didn't say much, just, how do you stop blaming yourself for not knowing? I told her, you don't need to forgive yourself for trusting someone who lied. That's their failure. Not yours. She didn't cry, but her posture changed. A little straighter. A little lighter. That's how I measure impact now, not in applause or headlines, but in quiet shifts. Marcus and I grew apart. No fight. No betrayal. Just life pulling in different directions. We were two people who met at a crossroads and helped each other remember how to move again. That was enough. It didn't need a forever. He messaged me a few months later. Just a simple note. You taught me what presence means. Thank you. I responded. You reminded me that gentleness doesn't have to come with strings. Then we let it go. Not everything broken needs fixing. Sometimes it just needs releasing. I started hiking more. Not for escape. For rhythm. There's something about placing one foot in front of the other with no expectation except forward. Nature doesn't ask questions. It doesn't demand a version of you that makes sense. One morning, I reached a ridge I hadn't visited before. No one else around. Just the sound of wind and the distant hum of life below. I pulled out my notebook. Not the legal one. The real one. On the next page, I wrote, "You don't owe the world your scars to prove you healed. But if you choose to show them, let it be for someone still bleeding." I've stopped waiting for the world to understand the full shape of what happened. Some people will always simplify it. She got scammed. She overreacted. She bounced back. Let them. Because I know the details they don't. The hours I spent doubting my memory. The calls that went unanswered. The nights I stared at a bank balance that read $0. 0 and told myself it wasn't the end. The messages I sent to women who didn't know yet that they'd been targeted. The first time I spoke into a courtroom mic with my hands steady. Let them minimize it. I'm not here for retweets. I'm here for truth that holds up even when no one's clapping. Sometimes I think about her, that version of me who believed him. The one who said, "Let's start a business together," and smiled when he promised forever. I don't hate her. I don't mock her. I protect her now, by never letting anyone lie to her like that again. There's no revenge in this ending. No cinematic twist. No final face-to-face where he begs and I walk away. There's just ownership. Of my voice. My money. My story. My time. My no. And more importantly, my yes. Last week, I gave a talk at a summit on digital coercion. Afterward, a man in his 60s approached me. Said he'd read an article I wrote anonymously last year. His daughter had been through something similar. He didn't know how to help her until he read my words. He shook my hand and said, "I didn't know what I didn't know. But now I do." That was enough. That's what justice feels like now, not a sentence, but a shift. As I write this, I'm sitting in the back room of our new office. There's a whiteboard filled with names, people to help, laws to change, gaps to fill. There's noise, progress, purpose. But my favorite part? The silence between tasks. The absence of fear. The return of peace without needing permission.